Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for having the opportunity to speak here. Um, so, um, so I just want to tell you guys about a project that I've been working with Suifang Zhou and Luo Yinglin, both of whom are here, and they'll be discussing particular aspects of the project. And we are mostly in some combination of China, Hong Kong, Boston, Nanjing, areas. So this is very inspired by neuroscience. So a lot in the art and science category, and then also inspired by our recent experiences, during the lockdown as well. Okay, so space is really powerful. So we don't really realize it, but space is actually the thing that we live ourselves in. And we don't really kind of understand how difficult it is to survive without it because we take it for granted. And so now, during the lockdown, where some of us don't have the space, or someone who's in Antarctica trying to survive in this kind of lockdown-like environment, we really understand what space really is good for. And space actually shapes our own vision and perception as well. So for example, there's been science experiments where if they put people in different seating arrangements, they actually perceive advertising differently, for example. And then in my own work, when I put in basically arrangements of furniture and space in different ways, you can actually get people to look differently in different places in the space, and also think about the space that they're in, framing it as different venues for different types of work. For example, like a presentation here versus a discussion. So what that means is, we want to know basically how space works and how we process space. And it turns out from neuroscience, we learned that actually humans have this cognitive map for representing space. So what that really means is that to show the inner workings of spatial navigation, especially right now, we want to basically show how our brain actually processes that information, and to be able to show that generatively, to give a generative process of having those cells be activated in different ways, and also the space be generatively generated, so that we can understand basically the relationship between the space and the outside and our minds, our cognitive space in the inside. So I'll just give you a very quick introduction to what neuroscientists have discovered. So the main thing that we're inspired by in this project is this idea of place cells. So what place cells are basically when you step, for example, we're all sitting in the room, most of us right now. If you go to a certain spot in your room, a particular cell in your brain in this area called the hippocampus is actually going to fire. When you go to a different place in your room, a different cell will actually fire. And that cell, they're called place cells, basically. And the space at which a particular cell fires is basically known as the place field, right? So that's what's shown on the left here. And then if you kind of understand that basic idea, we can now use this to basically try to build a model and build a generative art design platform to show what that process is actually like, right? Because scientists, they don't do that. They do experiments, but it's up to us now as artists to really, kind of show to the public what this idea really means. So, so now the first thing that we'll describe is basically how we model those cells. So Luo Ying will describe that for us.
Okay, we want to illustrate the network of cells by highlighting its spatial coding properties and to bring elements of architectural space into the visual design. In the first generation of the model, based on the morphology of the pyramidal cell, we explore possible forms of the place cell, from concrete to abstract. We then extend the place cell into 3D, producing modular model in an architectural approach. We realized that different cells in the brain are like modular buildings with the same components that can be built in different ways in the short run. I want to further explain why we use modular models. On one hand, modern models provide a system that allows for the randomized configuration necessary in the generative process. On the other hand, each module of the model system shares the same general structure, but has its own specific instantiation, mirroring the diversity of cell morphology in the brain. Then we modify the cells for a lot of times to adapt for the process that allow the information exchange in the interaction. We created a morphological, more functional version of the cell system. Now we know how to show the cell. Then how can we show the space with the cell represent?
Thanks, Roy. To represent the space, we're going back to look at the geared cell and its property that human navigation system relies on. We found that grids are arranged and coordinated the outer stimulations in a hexagonal formations. So we decided to apply the same methodology. That is, to really mimic this cell behavior pattern. As you can see from the right figures, the space formation consists of many individual hexagons, and we're trying to manage it to be the interactable fashion as a trigger for the players. The left figure shows basically how we experiment with different texture and the arrangement of the grid. Moving on, that we develop the control object in the space, that is a player, basically. We adopt the interaction loop as a method that widely used in the game development field. The left figure shows how we did it from the very beginning of the gray box character to the final transparent minimalist character. The right figure indicates that how we design and iterate the camera perspective. We eventually decide to use a camera following third-person view, for it shows best, both the player's interactions and the corresponding change in the game space. For the overall interactions, we again adopt the game method, that is to come up with the interaction loop, and so-called the main loop. There are basically three major components in this loop, that is the player, the grid, and the play cell. So the basic logic follows: the player triggers the grid cells, and the grid cell lead to the play cell firings, which the firing change shoots the visual feedback to the player as it makes the difference in the virtual environment. As we had introduced our foundation, 3D modeling, and the introduction for our projects, we now go back to Professor Ray for more about our generative processing.
Thanks, Rifan. So I'm going to talk about where the generative processes come in here. So there's basically two different things happening here. So one, there's the way of generating the cells, right? So one of the first things that we found is actually when you just put cells randomly on the grid, and those cells all have a particular place that they're tuned to. Well, that doesn't really work because it doesn't really make sense to somebody who's just walking around. So what we have to do is basically generate in a Brownian motion type format. And when we do that, then when, as you can see, like when this person walks around, they're kind of a sequence of cells that's firing at time, right? And that's because it's kind of corresponding to that particular sequence of walking or running, right? So the other generative process happening here is basically the space. So in this latest development, we also made this kind of a small space that kind of iteratively grows bigger and bigger when you find kind of like the right door to enter, basically, and it will remap the space. So this is kind of a generative way to show the space, and eventually it's sort of a game where you get to the right door a number of times, and then that space really opens up and you're kind of escaping from an environment in some sense. So there's two different types of generative processes happening here, and we're also representing, by the way, the cell firing in this using this like displacement, right? So you can see on the lower left here, when the cell is firing, that's kind of shown as kind of displacement of that of the vector there. Okay, so finally, I just want to show you three of the properties that neuroscientists have been exploring that I will also show in our platform, which is really interesting to us because I think this is the first time that anybody has shown anything like this kind of back to the design and art field. So one thing that people find in science about these play cells is something called rescaling. So when you put someone in a small room, right, and then you put someone on a room that's twice the size of that room, those cells will not fire at the same exact place that they were at. They will actually scale with the size of your room, right? So it's kind of smart cells. They're not just exactly your particular place. They actually scale with the size, and we can actually do that in our application as well. When we change the tile sizes, they actually scale with us. Another really interesting thing is called remapping. So in this kind of work, what people do is they put an animal or a person in one room. That's, for the simplest way is they put them in a square room, and then they put them in a circle room, and then they put them back in a square room, for instance, right? And then what you can see is that the cells that they remap their place field, they actually fire now at a different place. So that's very interesting what we did here. So what Suifang shows here is that in A, B, and C, there are different types of spaces, but that cell that is tuned to that space will be different. So the same cell is tuning to both A, B, and C when the space gets remapped. And you can do that for all kinds of stuff too. You could do different color rooms. You could do all kinds of fun, interesting tricks to show, so your brain actually adaptively is processing these kind of interesting dynamics whenever you go to a new room or a new environment. Your cells are automatically tuned to particular spaces, and they remap. And then the final, so this is kind of the same idea. I'm going to skip a little bit of this. So this is the same remapping idea. And this is what happens in our application when we do the remapping. Boom, you get a new space, and then the particular cells are tuned for different spaces as well. Anyways, we have this online that you can play with as well. We can show you later on. So the very last thing that I want to talk about is this really interesting thing called replay, right? So it's kind of like dreaming, right? So I know this is probably new for you and it sounds like science fiction, but there are actually cells in the brain which are replaying their activity when you're just sitting there. And the replay is happening in such a way that basically it's like prior trajectories that someone has walked. So for example, this person has walked, in this game, both to the left and to the right before. And it's actually replaying that activity when they're just sitting there in this point, right? But now when you do replay, they can also do this something called, well, I call it foreplay, but a lot of people call it forward kind of replay. And so this is like prediction instead of dreaming. So here the person is sitting at a decision point, and they don't know which side to go, and they've never gone left and never gone right, but they actually dreaming of what would happen, and they call it in neuroscience vicarious trial and error, and they can actually kind of explore in their mind what would happen if they went left and if they went right. So it's kind of like forward replay, and we can actually do this in our application too. So it's really some sci-fi type of stuff that neuroscientists have. Actually, this is Nobel Prize winning neuroscience as well. And so I think it's really interesting that we can now explore this, because I think, right now, of course, we're doing a simple digital application, but in the future, we want to expand and make an actual physical installation of it so that, we can use computer vision to track where people are and kind of actually show them in the projection format how this space would feel like, right? Of course, due to COVID, we haven't been able to do that yet, but that's what we like to do in the future. So I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for the invite. So, it's great to see everyone here, and super looking forward to learning about everybody's work as well. And I just want to shout out to Suifang and Luo Ying, who has worked super hard for this project, and I will also be here to answer additional questions as well. And by the way, this is the playable thing you can also explore at this website here that indicated here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.